I'm Julia. I'm 33, and I learned the hard way that the most devastating betrayal can come from the person sitting right next to you, the one who calls you friend, who brings you coffee, who tells you she's rooting for you. And when that betrayal costs you everything you've worked for, there's only one thing left to do: stay calm, stay quiet, and wait. If you've ever experienced something like this, comment below and subscribe. You're not alone. I've always been a quiet climber, not the kind who networks over cocktails or posts long-winded LinkedIn brags about hustle culture. I believe in results, in data, in quietly showing up and doing the job better than anyone expects. I started in operations 9 years ago as a logistics coordinator for a mid-size retail brand in Denver. Back then, I was fresh out of college, broke, and terrified of making mistakes. But I listened, learned quickly, and built systems from scratch that saved the company thousands in just my first year. By the time I landed the position at Cartwright and Cole, a fast-growing e-commerce firm in Seattle, I was seasoned, sharp, and ready for more. Within 2 years, I'd moved up from senior ops manager to head of fulfillment strategy. And when the director of operations position opened, I knew I had a real shot. My boss, Anthony, had been hinting at it for months. "You've carried this team," he'd said after a particularly nasty Q3 vendor failure. "We wouldn't be here without you, Julia. Keep doing what you're doing, and the next step is yours." That was all the motivation I needed. I doubled down. I took meetings at 6 a.m. with East Coast clients, stayed late to train the new hires, and even spent Thanksgiving weekend coordinating a crisis response when one of our overseas suppliers ran into a customs nightmare. I was tired, yes, exhausted, actually, but it felt worth it. I was investing in my future, and then came Renee. She was reassigned from the executive assistant pool during a temporary restructure in Q2. A mid-level assistant who'd worked with the CEO's office. She was smart, enthusiastic, and painfully likable. You know the type: bouncy ponytail, perfect teeth, and a joke for every occasion. She brought energy into every meeting, always carried those obnoxiously colorful gel pens, and had a way of making the office feel like a high school cafeteria where she was the unofficial prom queen, AT first. I didn't mind. I had more than enough on my plate, and Anthony asked me to take her under your wing since she was transitioning to operations. She shadowed me, asked questions, and soaked up every system I showed her like a sponge. I even gave her access to my personal dashboards, thinking she needed examples for learning. She thanked me profusely, called me her work big sis, and said she hoped to someday be as organized as I was. That's the first lesson I learned too late. Never hand someone a weapon and expect them not to use it. Renee wasn't just learning. She was studying me. And I didn't realize how deeply until the promotion started becoming real. In September, Anthony told me the board was finalizing the shortlist for the director role. "It's basically yours," he said. "Just hold things down during Q4. We need a calm, steady hand." I nodded. I was calm. I was steady. I had this. Then came the vendor fiasco in October. A shipping partner dropped the ball on a major holiday rollout, thousands of delayed packages, hundreds of angry customers. I took the heat, pulled a 72-hour marathon with my team, and got things back on track within days. It was hell, but I pulled us through, or so I thought. 2 weeks later, Anthony called me into his office. His tone was clipped. "Julia, I'm getting some feedback, concerns about leadership during the vendor crisis. Some reports said you weren't communicating clearly with the team." "What reports?" I asked, caught off guard. "Who said that?" He wouldn't say. "Anonymous feedback through HR. Also, there's concern that you might be stretched too thin." I blinked at him. "I've been here nearly every night until 9 p.m. I built the contingency plan that saved us." "I know," he said quickly. "And I've seen your work. But perception matters. The board is looking at soft leadership metrics now, not just output." It didn't make sense. My team respected me. We just hit our best on-time fulfillment rate of the year. Where was this coming from? Then I started noticing little things. Renee, who had once come to me for everything, was now in closed-door meetings with Anthony. She stopped sitting next to me in team syncs. When a system bug derailed a Monday shipment, she was the one who flagged it in the shared chat, tagging Anthony, not me. Even though I was her direct lead, I brushed it off. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe she was just being proactive, but then came the final blow. 3 candidates made the shortlist. Myself, a longtime senior manager named Daryl, and an external hire, Carla Munoz, a supply chain expert from Chicago. I wasn't worried. My record spoke for itself. The final interviews came and went. I wore my best suit, came armed with projections, solutions, and a vision that could carry the company into its next stage of growth. Anthony smiled at me when I left the room. "You nailed it," he said. "Seriously, I'll talk to the board. You should hear back by next week." I didn't even make it to Tuesday. On Monday morning, I was called back into the glass conference room, the same one they used for interviews, HR exits, and announcements that always felt colder than the temperature in the room. Anthony sat across from me, lips tight. "I'm sorry," he said. "They chose Carla." I stared at him, confused. "Carla? The external?" "They wanted a fresh voice," he explained. "Someone with broader experience." There were concerns raised during the feedback round about your team communication style. Some employees felt excluded or overlooked during the Q4 firestorm. I felt my stomach drop. That's not true. I had daily syncs. I CC'd every single department lead. Anthony looked uncomfortable. There were red flags from multiple sources. I pressed my lips together. Was Renee one of them? He paused. That was all the answer I needed. I walked out of that room without saying another word. Past the break room, where Renee sat with her legs crossed and her voice loud, laughing with 2 junior analysts over something on her phone. She spotted me, and for the briefest second, her smile faltered, then she gave me a little wave. Like nothing had happened. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I nodded once, smiled, and kept walking. I took the week off. Called it stress leave. Sat in my apartment with all the blinds drawn, going over everything in my head, like a crime scene. I realized how easily she'd played me, the casual questions about timelines, the sudden favors where she offered to take things off my plate and then reported they weren't done. The moments where she dropped subtle comments in meetings like, "I wasn't sure what Julia wanted, but I did my best." All of it was a setup. She'd been building a case against me, and I'd been too busy working to notice. Most people would have quit. Or maybe gone to HR and raised hell. But I know how these things go. The optics were already poisoned. Anthony wasn't going to fight for me. Renee had wormed her way into his good graces, and Carla, well, she didn't know any better, but I had something Renee didn't expect. I knew the system. I knew every flaw in the supply chain. And I had patience. When Carla officially stepped in as director and Renee was promoted to operations development coordinator, I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I congratulated them both. I smiled. I clapped at the team meeting, and I even brought donuts on Carla's first Monday, because revenge doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes in the form of trust, and I was about to become Carla's most trusted advisor. I should have hated Carla. After all, she got the job I'd spent years working toward. A position that had felt practically sewn into my skin after everything I'd sacrificed. But Carla wasn't the enemy. She didn't sabotage me. She didn't sneak through the cracks with smiles and secrets. That was Renee, and Carla, to her credit, knew she'd walked into a battlefield. Her first few weeks were awkward. Everyone was watching her, some out of curiosity, others out of quiet resentment. The team had expected me to step into the role, and while no one said it out loud, their eyes said it for them. Carla noticed. I could see it in the way she held herself in meetings, shoulders stiff, voice just a bit too rehearsed, constantly glancing at Anthony for cues. I decided to be useful. I showed up to our first one-on-one with a folder of transition documents I'd created. Everything from vendor contacts to risk assessments, organized and highlighted. Carla's eyes lit up when she opened it. Wow, she murmured. This is amazing. Did Anthony ask you to prepare all this? No, I said simply. I just figured you'd want a running start. She looked up at me, almost suspiciously. You're not angry? I smiled. Of course I'm disappointed. But that doesn't mean I want you to fail. That was a lie. Partially. I didn't want Carla to fail. I wanted Renee to fail. I wanted Renee to slip in the shadows of her own lies. And the best way to make that happen was to ensure Carla succeeded without Renee's influence. From that day forward, Carla leaned on me. At first it was small things, clarifying who handled what, asking my opinion on vendor contracts, even borrowing my project timeline formats. But it grew quickly. Within a month, I was sitting beside her in leadership meetings, whispering corrections when she stumbled on acronyms, feeding her background context during budgeting sessions. I never made her feel foolish, never undermined her, just gently filled in the gaps, and she appreciated it. I don't know how they expected me to step into this without you, she told me one afternoon over coffee. Half the systems here are held together with duct tape and prayers. I laughed softly. That's the Cartwright charm. It looks smooth from the outside. She leaned in. You know, I reviewed some of the feedback from the director interviews. You were clearly the most qualified. I froze. You read the feedback? She nodded. Anthony let me see it. I think he thought it would help me learn the company culture. But some of the comments, they were weird. I sipped my coffee. Weird how? She hesitated, then lowered her voice. One said you were overly controlling. Another said you struggled to delegate. But then I read your reports and it was obvious that wasn't true. My jaw clenched. Anything else? One comment said you were planning to leave the company soon. That you were only applying for the promotion to pad your resume. I blinked slowly. That's a lie. I figured, she said quietly. The writing style was inconsistent with the rest. It stood out. I didn't say anything, but my heart was pounding. Renee, she'd gone further than I thought. Not just sabotaging me behind closed doors, but leaving her fingerprints all over anonymous feedback. Trying to paint me as unstable, disloyal, all while calling me her mentor to my face. But I didn't tell Carla. Not yet. That wasn't part of the plan. Instead, I doubled down. I positioned myself as Carla's right hand. I anticipated her needs, fixed problems before they hit her desk, quietly rewrote presentations she struggled with, all without taking credit. The rest of the team started coming to me more than they came to her, and she didn't mind. She trusted me, relied on me, valued me. Renee noticed. IT started with the eye rolls. Then came the passive-aggressive questions in meetings. Shouldn't this be Carla's decision, Julia? She asked during a strategy sync when I suggested a supplier pivot. Carla looked up from her laptop. Julia's been in charge of the logistics model longer than anyone. I trust her judgment. Renee smiled tightly. Of course. Just want to make sure lines don't get blurry. Another time, she CC'd Carla on an email chain where she tried to imply I'd missed a compliance update, just looping everyone in. Don't want anything falling through the cracks, she wrote. Problem was, I hadn't missed it. I'd submitted the update early. Renee had just forgotten to refresh the shared dashboard before firing her email grenade. I responded politely, attached the timestamped file, and thanked her for her concern. Carla replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Renee didn't respond. A week later, Carla reorganized our internal roles. She gave me ownership of vendor negotiation, something Renee had been quietly eyeing for months. I expected backlash. Instead, Renee smiled when the announcement hit Slack. Congrats, Jules, she wrote. You're amazing. So glad Carla sees your value. I knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she first called me mentor. Sugar-laced poison, but I didn't take the bait. Instead, I started documenting everything, every snide comment in meetings, every Slack message with a double meaning, every accidental oversight or suspiciously timed suggestion. I created a folder called Performance Parity Review and filled it with screen captures, dates, Internal message logs, everything Renee had done to try and undercut me since the promotion. Why? Because I wasn't just going to reclaim my reputation. I was going to make sure the next time she sabotaged someone, there'd be a record she couldn't erase. The perfect opportunity came during Q1 planning. Carla asked me to co-lead a presentation to the board on our revised fulfillment strategy. It was our biggest pitch of the quarter, the kind of spotlight moment I used to dream of. Renee asked if she could contribute slides. Carla hesitated but eventually agreed. The day of the presentation, Renee submitted her portion, a rushed, unvetted section with metrics pulled from outdated sources. She claimed they were recently updated, but I caught the discrepancies immediately. "Renee," I said after reviewing it, "this data is from July. You've got projections in here that were already proven wrong last quarter." She shrugged. "I thought we were just painting a broad picture." "We're presenting to the board," I said flatly. "There's no room for outdated projections." "I'm sure Carla can fix it," she said sweetly, but I didn't need to argue. I took screenshots of her source links, flagged the inconsistencies to Carla privately, and rewrote the section myself with real data. Carla presented it flawlessly. The board approved the plan with full support. Afterward, Carla turned to me and said, "I don't know how you do it. You basically run this department." I smiled. Let's just say I've had a lot of practice. But the real moment came 2 weeks later. Anthony called me into his office. Again, but this time he was smiling. "I owe you an apology," he said, pushing a printed report across his desk. "Carla submitted this, says you've been doing director-level work since day one. She's recommending a formal title change and salary adjustment." I picked up the paper. It was a full breakdown of my projects, responsibilities, and team feedback. At the bottom, Carla had written, "Julia's leadership has transformed this department. I trust her more than anyone on my team. If we want to retain her, we need to act like we value her." I looked up, stunned. "She didn't tell me she was submitting this. She said you'd be too modest to ask for it yourself." Anthony chuckled. "You trained your own boss. Impressive." The raise was approved by the end of the week. Renee, meanwhile, was suddenly moved off key projects. Carla stopped copying her on strategic threads. Her influence was shrinking fast, and I wasn't done yet. I sent Carla a quiet message. "When you have time, I'd like to share some documentation with you. I think it's relevant to team alignment." She replied in less than a minute. "Absolutely. I've had some questions about her behavior too." The moment had arrived. IT wasn't revenge. IT was justice. The moment I hit send on the documentation folder, I felt it, not satisfaction exactly, but clarity. A quiet certainty that this was no longer just about me or my stolen promotion. It was about stopping Renee before she hurt someone else. Because what she did wasn't just petty office politics. It was sabotage, and I had proof that I'd spent weeks compiling it all. Slack messages, altered spreadsheet timestamps, backdated file edits, misleading reports she had forwarded to Anthony, and, most damning of all, a private note she'd accidentally sent to me instead of another team lead. A message that read, "Carla's sweet but naive. I give her 6 months. Meanwhile, I'm making myself indispensable, especially since Julia won't be around forever." That last sentence replayed in my mind for days. IT wasn't just a threat. It was a plan, and I wasn't going to let it unfold. Carla messaged me within 15 minutes of reading the documentation. "Carla, can we talk? Right now, if possible. Me, I'm free," she called instead of messaging. Her voice was calm, but clipped. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Julia, what the hell?" I hesitated. "I didn't want to dump this on you during your first few months, but I also couldn't stay silent anymore." She sighed heavily. "You know what's worse? I suspected something was off. I just didn't want to believe it." I stayed silent. "I've been watching her," Carla continued. "She never takes ownership. She's always smiling and suggesting things, but never finishing them. And now this. You deserve to know who you're trusting," I said. "I learned that the hard way." There was a long pause. Then Carla said something that made my breath catch. She tried to do it to me too. What? 2 weeks ago, after that strategy meeting, she pulled me aside and said, and I quote, "You know, you don't have to keep Julia in the loop for everything. Some people don't do well with transition, and it might be better if you start leaning on newer voices." I sat back in my chair, my pulse pounding. She said that. I whispered, she did. I didn't want to assume. But now I know. Another silence stretched between us. Then she said, "I'll handle it." Discreetly. "But thank you, Julia, for trusting me with this." I nodded, though she couldn't see it. "Just be careful. She knows how to make herself look like the victim." "Oh, believe me," Carla said. "I've seen it before. But she doesn't realize I've done this job longer than she's been in the workforce." We ended the call, and I sat there for a long time staring at my screen. My hands were steady, my mind sharp, but a strange emptiness crept in. I'd spent months crafting this quiet, deliberate path back to relevance, power, and truth. And now the final domino had been nudged. The question was, what would it hit next? Over the next few weeks, I watched the unraveling begin. IT started subtly. Renee stopped getting invited to planning syncs. Her name disappeared from the agendas of leadership meetings. Her casual check-ins with Anthony became formal emails instead of hallway chats. She wasn't demoted, not immediately, but her status was slipping like water through cupped hands. The team noticed point one afternoon. Thomas from procurement leaned into my cubicle and whispered, "Did something happen with Renee? She used to ping me about everything. Now it's radio silence." I shrugged. "You'd have to ask Carla." He nodded slowly. "Whatever it is, the vibes changed." Indeed it had. Meanwhile, Carla began empowering me publicly. She'd reference me during presentations, put my name at the top of strategy reports, and invited me to sit in on investor briefings, something that had previously been reserved only for directors and above. IT was clear to everyone who was really running the department now. Renee, of course, didn't take it lightly. She tried to pivot. Suddenly, she was everyone's best friend again. She brought in homemade cookies. She complimented Carla's shoes during every meeting. She even left a sticky note on my desk one morning that said, "Hope you're having a fab week, Jules." Smiling face with smiling eyes, I didn't respond. And then, one Thursday morning, it happened. I was sitting at my desk finishing up quarterly projections when I heard raised voices coming from Carla's office. Her door was open just a crack, and I couldn't help but hear snippets. "Completely unfair. Not aligned with your responsibilities. After everything I've contributed." Then, silence. Moments later, Renee stormed past me, eyes red, jaw tight. Her heels hitting the floor like gunshots. She didn't look at me. Just grabbed her bag and left. Carla emerged 10 minutes later and called me in. She looked calm. Collected. Maybe a little tired. She confronted me, she said, gesturing for me to sit. I said, keeping my voice neutral. She accused me of trying to edge her out. Said she's been nothing but loyal. That you've poisoned me against her. I blinked. What did you say? I told her loyalty means doing the job right. Not just smiling through sabotage. A chill ran down my spine. Carla wasn't just firm, she was surgical. "She'll be on performance watch for the next 90 days, Carla continued. "And if she slips once, just once, it's over." I nodded. "That's fair." "She won't see it coming," Carla added. "But it'll be clean. Documented. Professional." I felt something like respect swell in my chest. Carla wasn't just a placeholder or puppet. She was steel under silk, and for the first time, I was genuinely glad she'd gotten the job, because she wasn't just surviving, she was cleansing the system. The fallout came faster than I expected. BY Week 6, Renee had made her first misstep. An unapproved supplier outreach that triggered a chain of mismatched invoices. When Carla called her on it, she claimed she was just taking initiative. 2 days later, she forgot to update a compliance document before a regional audit. We passed, barely, but Carla flagged it in the performance review. BY Week 10, she had quietly stopped smiling. Her makeup was thinner. Her usually bouncy voice now sounded like gravel. People started avoiding her, and then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, HR sent out a generic team transition notice. Renee had been off-boarded as part of strategic restructuring. No fanfare. No party. Just gone. Her desk was cleared by noon. I found myself standing near the glass wall of Carla's office as she watched the rain streak down the windows. "She's gone," I said. Carla nodded without looking up. "She left herself months ago." It just took the paper to catch up. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel crueled. I felt peace, because for once, justice had worked not through screaming matches or rumors, but through professionalism, patience, and proof. Carla turned to me. "Let's talk about your future here." And just like that, the door opened again. Carla's office was quiet, almost too quiet for what she'd just said. "Let's talk about your future here." Those 7 words hit like a gust of warm air after a long, punishing winter. For months, I'd operated in survival mode, navigating betrayal, masking disappointment, reclaiming respect brick by careful brick. I hadn't even allowed myself to think beyond the day-to-day. But now, here it was. My moment. Not a title handed down from Anthony, not a sympathy appointment, but a future earned and offered from someone who actually saw me. I nodded slowly, trying to keep my expression neutral, but my heart was pounding hard in my chest. "Okay." Carla motioned for me to take a seat. She closed her laptop and leaned forward with her elbows on the desk. "You've been doing director-level work for 6 months. Honestly, longer. I knew within 2 weeks of starting here that the department only functioned because of you. If that makes Anthony uncomfortable, so be it. I didn't come here to keep egos safe. I came to build results." I exhaled, the tightness in my throat releasing slightly. "I'd needed to hear that more than I realized," she continued. "Now, I could push for your formal promotion to Director of Fulfillment, but honestly, that title's too small for you now. I want to restructure the division." I blinked. "Restructure?" "Yes. Right now, we've got 3 departments, fulfillment, inventory, and logistics, all reporting to me. That's inefficient. We're growing too fast for that model. I want to create a new operations development branch, led by you. Strategy, optimization, vendor management, and long-term growth planning, all yours." My breath caught. "You want me to run a branch?" "Yes," she said simply. "You'll report to me directly. I've already started drafting a proposal. I just needed to see how things shook out with Renee." It was everything I had worked for and more. Not just a promotion, but a chance to design the future of the department. To shape policy, develop systems, and lead on my own terms. I swallowed hard. "Why me?" Carla smiled. "Because you're not trying to prove anything. You're trying to build something. And that's the kind of leadership I want on my team." That night, I stayed late at the office not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I sat by the window overlooking the rainy Seattle skyline, my laptop open, a new document glowing on the screen titled, Ops Dev, Phase 1 Blueprint, for the first time in what felt like years. I let myself imagine a future where I wasn't chasing validation or dodging sabotage, a future where I led from a place of strength, not survival. But part of me also knew this wasn't over, because people like Renee didn't disappear quietly forever. And the higher you climb, the more exposed you become. Over. The next few weeks, Carla and I worked quietly behind the scenes, designing the new operations development branch. We mapped out its structure, scoped out potential internal promotions, and started rewriting job descriptions to better match our evolving needs. It was thrilling, creative, strategic work that energized me in a way nothing had in years. We decided to pilot the restructuring in Q2 with an internal announcement first, followed by a phased rollout, but just as the pieces were aligning, a familiar name resurfaced in the most unexpected way. "Did you hear?" my colleague Thomas said during lunch one afternoon. "Renee got a job at Vector Commerce." I almost choked on my iced tea. "Vector," I repeated. "As in our primary competitor?" He nodded, looking equally bemused. "Yep. She's apparently heading up their fulfillment innovation team." The announcement went up on LinkedIn this morning. I pulled out my phone and searched for her profile. Sure enough, there it was. Renee Calloway, head of fulfillment innovation at Vector Commerce, and below it, a caption that read, "Thrilled to join a team that values creativity, courage, and forward-thinking logistics strategy. Let's build the future of commerce, without ego, gatekeeping, or politics." I let out a dry laugh. Without ego or politics. That's rich. Thomas raised his eyebrows. Think she'll try to poach from us? Oh, I said quietly, she'll try more than that. I wasn't wrong. 2 weeks later, we received a contract termination request from one of our third-party suppliers, a mid-tier packaging manufacturer we'd worked with for years. The language was standard, but something about the timing felt off. Carla forwarded it to me that afternoon. Any red flags? I skimmed it, then pulled up my records. This doesn't make sense, I said. We just renegotiated their rates. We saved them almost $40,000 in freight costs this quarter. Carla frowned. Who's their point of contact? I checked. Gregory Simmons. Didn't he work with Renee before she left? I paused. Yes. She onboarded him. Carla tapped her pen against her notebook. Let's do a vendor loyalty audit. Quietly. Check for any other sudden terminations or reassignments. Let's see if we've got a leak. Over the next week, I ran the numbers. What I found was disturbing. 3 suppliers, all mid-level, all legacy vendors, had recently restructured their operations, quietly backing away from exclusive agreements with us. 2 of them had recently signed with Vector. IT wasn't illegal. It wasn't even technically unethical. Vendors had the right to explore new partnerships. But the pattern was too specific to be coincidence. Carla called it before I did. She's trying to replicate our playbook, she said, shaking her head. She didn't just leave. She's trying to steal. I nodded grimly. She's using everything she learned from me and trying to turn it against us. The anger I thought I'd buried months ago returned, colder now. More focused, but I wasn't going to panic that I was going to win. We implemented a new vendor protection protocol within 2 weeks. First, we built stronger, tiered loyalty incentives, things we should have done years ago. Second, we quietly flagged suppliers with previous connections to Renee and rerouted them through neutral account managers. Finally, we created a decoy initiative, a flashy but non-essential expansion program that we promoted just enough to seem attractive and entirely bait-like. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, one of Vector's new pitch decks leaked through a mutual vendor contact. IT was an almost word-for-word duplication of our decoy program, including the internal codename we'd used as a joke, Project Mirage. Carla and I exchanged a look during our next strategy meeting. She's not just desperate, Carla said. She's lazy. She thinks she knows the script, I said. Because she stole the rehearsal notes. Well, Carla said, sipping her coffee, it's time for a new act. And so we wrote one to be why the time Q2 rolled in. The operations development branch was official. We announced it company-wide during an all-hands meeting, complete with new roles, team names, and a rebranding that positioned us as the innovation heart of Cartwright and Cole's operational future. I was introduced as the new head of Ops Dev. The applause felt like thunder in my chest. Even Anthony clapped. After the meeting, Carla pulled me aside. I've already updated your comp package, she said. And I added a clause, you now have creative control over all forward planning initiatives. My voice trembled slightly. Thank you. No, Julia, she said. Thank you. You turned sabotage into strategy. Most people would have burned out. You built something better. It wasn't until a month later that I got the final piece of closure I didn't know I needed. I was leaving the office late, rain tapping gently on the windows, when my phone buzzed with a message request. IT was from Renee. Renee, saw the Ops Dev launch. Impressive. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then typed, me, thanks. She replied almost instantly. Renee, no hard feelings, I hope. You know how this industry is competitive, political. I just wanted a chance to grow. I closed my eyes, then typed, me, No hard feelings. But growth doesn't come from stepping on others. It comes from what you build when no one's watching. There was no reply. I put my phone down and turned off my monitor. The rain had stopped. Outside, the streetlights reflected in soft gold against the wet pavement. And I felt it again, not revenge, not triumph, but peace. I hadn't destroyed Renee. She did that herself. I just stopped playing along. There's something almost surreal about becoming the very thing someone tried to keep you from. Not in a vengeful, victorious way, not a movie montage kind of triumph. It's quieter than that, more introspective. You walk the same hallways, sit in the same meetings, hear your name spoken with a new tone of reverence, and some days, it feels like you're inhabiting a version of yourself you imagined years ago, one you had to fight through betrayal and exhaustion to finally become. The morning after the official launch of the Operations Development Branch, I arrived at the office early, long before most of the team filtered in. The building felt different. Maybe it was just me. Maybe it was the nameplate on my office door that read Julia Harper, Head of Operations Development. Maybe it was knowing that I now led a team of 12, had 2 senior strategists reporting to me directly, and full creative authority over how our systems evolved. But the thing that truly hit hardest wasn't my office or titled IT was who came to me first. Hey, Julia? I looked up from my computer to find Harper, a junior analyst who joined us the year before, standing at my door with a notebook in hand and uncertainty in her eyes. I was wondering, if you had a moment? I know you're probably drowning right now, but come in, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. She smiled, stepping inside and perching nervously on the edge of the seat. I've been working on a project, independently outside of my normal scope, and I don't know if it's any good, but I thought maybe if you had time. She opened her notebook, her voice trembling just slightly as she walked me through a predictive fulfillment algorithm she'd been sketching based on supplier patterns. It was raw but smart. Ambitious. By the time she finished, I was smiling. Harper, this is brilliant. It needs refinement, sure, but this could absolutely become part of our Q3 innovation slate. Her eyes widened. Really? Yes, and I want you to keep leading it. Her cheeks flushed. Thank you. I wasn't sure if I should bring it to Carla, or you brought it to the right person, I said. She nodded, stood, and paused at the door. Thank you, Julia. You make it feel safe to speak up. She was gone before I could respond, but her words stayed with me because that was why I did this. Not for revenge. Not to win some imaginary war with Renee, but to create a space where no one had to shrink to survive. Where people like Harper didn't have to second-guess whether they were allowed to be brilliant. As the weeks passed, Ops Dev began to grow roots. We tested new workflows, implemented hybrid tech stacks, and rolled out an internal review tool that tripled reporting accuracy in under a month. The company's leadership started taking notice. One afternoon, Anthony, yes, that Anthony, stopped by my office. Hey, Julia. Got a minute? I didn't roll my eyes. Didn't smirk. I just motioned for him to enter. He closed the door and sat down with a half-apologetic expression. I've been meaning to say congratulations. You've built something genuinely impressive. Thank you, I said evenly. He paused. I underestimated you. Not your ability, exactly. I always knew you were sharp. But your presence. My presence. He nodded. You lead differently. You don't do the peacocking. You don't dominate meetings. But you're twice as effective as people who do. Honestly, it's changed how I look at leadership. That admission, humble, unexpected, hit deeper than I expected. For so long, I'd hated Anthony. Blamed him for not fighting for me. And while I wasn't ready to forgive everything, I could acknowledge this olive branch. Thank you for saying that, I told him. He stood, smiled awkwardly, and added, also, the board wants you at the Investor Summit next month. Carla's pushing for you to lead the keynote. That stopped me cold. Wait me. Yes, you're the face of our operational evolution now. They want to hear from you. After he left, I sat in stunned silence. Keynote, me, The same woman who was once told she lacked proactive leadership energy. The same woman whose name was deliberately erased from consideration by a coworker she mentored. The same woman who nearly quit. Now I'd be representing the company in front of our largest stakeholders. I didn't cry, but I smiled so hard it hurt. The night before the summit, I lay in bed with my presentation slides glowing softly on my laptop, running through my speech one last time. I wasn't nervous, not really, but I was thoughtful, reflective. I thought about my first day at Cartwright and Cole, about the first project I pitched that got dismissed, about the nights I stayed in the office until midnight, cleaning up messes others had left behind, about the cupcakes Renee brought when I got shortlisted for the director role, about the feeling of betrayal, the silence, the long, careful climb back to this exact moment, and then I closed the laptop and went to sleep, calm, ready. The Investor Summit was held at the Fairmont downtown, high ceilings, glass chandeliers, and a ballroom full of sharp suits and sharper opinions. I wore a navy pantsuit with a simple silver necklace. Understated, clean, strong, Carla met me outside the stage entrance. "You good?" she asked, squeezing my shoulder. I nodded. "Let's do this." When they called my name, I walked out to polite applause. By the end of the presentation, during which I unveiled our latest innovation metrics and future vision for fulfillment scalability, that applause had turned thunderous. The CEO himself approached me afterward. "Julia, that was phenomenal," he said. "Your clarity, your depth, we need more leadership like yours." I thanked him and shook his hand, and just as I was stepping aside to let the next speaker prepare, a familiar voice stopped me. Well, that was unexpected. I turned. Renee. She looked smaller. Not physically, but energetically. Like a balloon slightly deflated. Her suit was designer, but her posture lacked its former confidence. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "Vector sent me," she said, forcing a smile. "We have a shared panel later this afternoon." Of course, we were presenting at the same summit. "How's the innovation team?" I asked casually. "Fine," she said too quickly. "We're in a transitional phase. You know how that goes." I nodded. "I do." She hesitated, then looked away. "You are always more strategic than people gave you credit for." "That's kind of the point," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then she said, "I didn't mean for it to go so far, back then." I studied her. "You meant for me to fail." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "I was scared. And ambitious. And I saw you as an obstacle. I never saw you as anything but a colleague." That landed hard. She looked down, hands twisting around the strap of her purse. "Well, you won. I guess that makes us even." "No," I said, stepping closer. "We're not even. I didn't win by beating you. I won by choosing not to be like you." She blinked. "You always were so righteous." "No," I corrected. "I just played the long game. You burned bridges. I built better ones." She didn't respond, and I didn't wait. I turned and walked away, toward my future, toward my team, toward everything I had earned through persistence, grace, and yes, patience. Because real power isn't about control, it's about influence. And now, I had all of IT to be by the time I returned from the Investor Summit. Everything had changed, not just on paper, but in the air itself. The tension I used to feel walking into the office, that lingering doubt from months of sabotage and silence, was gone. Replaced by a quiet confidence. The kind that builds not from ego, but from momentum. A sense that, finally, things were moving with me instead of against me, but just because the storm had passed didn't mean there weren't aftershocks. The Monday after the summit, I received an internal email flagged as high priority. Subject: External conflict of interest notice. Immediate review required. The sender? Compliance and Ethics Committee. My stomach dropped. I clicked it open and scanned the contents. My name wasn't in the first paragraph. Then the second. And then I saw it. Preliminary investigation suggests that proprietary operational metrics and internal workflow diagrams have appeared in a promotional pitch shared by Vector Commerce. referencing strategy materials authored by Julia Harper. My hands went cold. I stared at the screen, heart thudding, mind racing. I didn't even need to finish the rest to know what it meant. Renee had stolen from me again. Not just concepts this time. Not ideas reworded or paraphrased. She had lifted literal diagrams and performance metrics from my summit presentation and used them in Vector's investor proposal. Brazen, reckless, and incredibly stupid. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and called Carla. She answered on the second ring. "I saw the email," she said before I could speak. "I'm already handling it." "She stole proprietary data," I said, pacing. "She must have recorded the summit, screenshotted the deck." "She did," Carla said. "We have the timestamps. And better yet, we have witnesses." That stopped me. Witnesses. Yes. Apparently, she was careless at one of the networking events. Bragged to a supplier over drinks that she was going to beat Cartwright at their own game using their own blueprints. The supplier didn't like her tone, sent us a statement this morning. I laughed once, bitterly. She really thought she could outmaneuver both of us. Carla's voice hardened. "She didn't just cross a line, Julia. She walked off a cliff." By the end of the day, our legal team had contacted Vector Commerce with a cease and desist order. Renee's presentation was pulled. A formal complaint was filed with the Industry Compliance Board. 3 days later, word came down that Vector had terminated Renee's contract, effective immediately. Carla stood in my doorway that afternoon holding a single printed email. "She's done," she said, her voice quiet. I took the paper and read it. A bland HR announcement from Vector, thanking her for her contributions and wishing her the best in her future endeavors. "She won't get another leadership position in this industry," Carla added. "Not after this. Not after stealing from a public keynote." I nodded slowly, absorbing IT. IT wasn't joy I felt. IT was justice. IT was relief. IT was the end of a chapter one never wanted to write. But even with Renee gone, the impact of her actions wasn't finished. Because something else was starting to shift, something I hadn't anticipated. Anthony, since the restructure, he'd kept a low profile with me. Cordial, but distant. He still technically outranked Carla in the company's hierarchy, but the board's favor had clearly tipped. Carla's results, our success, the summit speech, all of it had cemented her as the future, and Anthony? He'd become a shadow of the executive who once held the keys to my future. I saw the tension growing between them in leadership syncs, the way Carla gently challenged his ideas, the way he sometimes subtly excluded her from high-level CC chains, as if trying to reassert control. But the real moment came during a quarterly planning session. We were reviewing budget allocations. Carla proposed a shift in funds to support a new automation rollout in OpsDev, one I had spearheaded, projected to save us $200,000 in annual processing time alone. Anthony frowned. "That's a large ask. Can we trust the projections?" Carla met his gaze. "The projections come from Julia's team. They've been peer-reviewed twice. You're welcome to audit them." Anthony glanced at me. "No offense, Julia. But it's a big leap." "No offense taken," I said evenly. "But numbers don't lie. And we've got 3 months of pilot data to back them up." He didn't argue further. But I saw it, that flicker of something else behind his eyes. Not doubt, not dismissal, jealousy, because I had become the person he failed to promote, and now I was outperforming even his safest picks. Later that day, I got a message from an unfamiliar name. Marla Jensen, executive assistant to the CEO. "Hi, Julia. Hope you're well. The CEO would like to schedule a one-on-one with you next week to discuss OpsDev. Are you available Tuesday at 10? I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. IT was happening. I was being pulled into the next tier. The meeting with the CEO was held on the top floor, a quiet corner of the building most people only saw during onboarding tours or termination exits. I'd been there once before, years ago, when I'd signed my original contract. Now I was back. Only this time, I wasn't being onboarded. I was being noticed. The CEO, Robert Lansing, was sharp and succinct. He didn't waste words. He'd watched my summit presentation. He'd reviewed the ops dev quarterly performance. He'd seen the cease and desist filings, and he was impressed. "We need more of what you're doing," he said simply. "Whatever Carla gave you, keep doing it. And if you have ideas for scaling this company's logistics division, I want to hear them." It was surreal. It felt like something out of a corporate fairy tale, but I didn't let it go to my head. I thanked him, pitched a few ideas, and left the meeting with a handwritten note from him saying, "Exceptional work. This company is better because of you." I took the elevator back down in silence, the note pressed between my fingers like a fragile piece of evidence that I hadn't imagined any of it, that I was here, that it was real. But just as the sky was clearing, another storm started brewing. One morning, Harper, the junior analyst I'd been mentoring, came to my office looking pale. "Julia, can I show you something?" I gestured her in. She pulled up a message on her phone. It was from Anthony, and it wasn't appropriate, not overtly. Not enough to be legally damning. But it was full of subtle suggestions, unsolicited praise about her brightness, comments about her outshining her peers, offers to mentor her personally after hours. It reeked of manipulation, not of grooming. Harper looked embarrassed. "I don't know if I'm overreacting." "You're not," I said firmly. "Thank you for trusting me." "I didn't want to jeopardize my job." "You won't," I said. "I'll handle this." And I did. I brought it to Carla that afternoon. She read the messages once, then again. Then set the phone down and looked at me. "We report this," she said. "Immediately. And we protect her." It took 2 weeks. 2 silent, tense, careful weeks. But by the end of it, Anthony was gone, resigned to pursue new opportunities. The announcement didn't mention the investigation. It didn't mention the warnings filed by 3 other junior employees after Harper came forward. But I knew, Carla knew, and now Harper would never have to wonder if her intelligence was a liability. On the Friday after Anthony's departure, the leadership team met for the first time without him. The energy was different, open, free. Carla led the meeting, but before it began, she turned to me. "Julia, would you kick us off?" I blinked. "Me? Yes. This week started with your initiative. Let's honor that." So I did. I stood. I led. And no one questioned it. I belonged there. I had finally, truly arrived. The strange thing about success is how quickly people forget the climb it took to get there. Suddenly, the person they once dismissed becomes the expert in the room. The same voices that doubted you now echo your opinions. The ones who underestimated you learn to measure their words. And those who once worked to keep you small? They vanish from the narrative entirely, like they were never part of it. But some ghosts don't stay gone. 2 months after Anthony's departure, Cartwright and Cole was thriving. The operations development branch had surpassed its Q2 benchmarks ahead of schedule. Harper's predictive logistics tool was quietly becoming our internal gold standard. And I'd been invited to speak at 2 more industry panels, one of which would be live-streamed by the Global E-commerce Association. Carla and I had even begun discussions about international expansion. My team had grown from 12 to 18. I wasn't just leading, I was scaling leadership. When I received a cryptic email from an unknown address with the subject line "Truth always circles back," I almost didn't open it, but curiosity is a powerful thing. The message was short: "You built your throne on lies. Don't forget who helped you get there." There was no signature. But I didn't need one. Renee, I stared at the screen, equal parts irritated and bemused. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even clever. It was desperation. Still, the words wormed into my head. "Don't forget who helped you get there." Helped me. She sabotaged me. Lied. Stole. Tried to tear me down in the most insidious way possible. But as I sat there, something gnawed at the edge of my memory. A conversation I'd once overheard between Renee and Anthony in the break room. Months before she turned on me. Before the promotion shortlist. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just harmless chatter. But now it clicked. Anthony, she's a workhorse, sure. But not exactly leadership material. Needs polish. Presence. Renee, she's got loyalty though. People like her. Anthony, yeah, well, likable doesn't get you boardroom access. Renee had defended me subtly, but still. Before she flipped sides. Before she saw an opening for herself, I leaned back, thinking hard. Why had she turned? It wasn't sudden. She'd been close. Admiring. Grateful, even. Then, cold. Strategic, and now? Bitter, which meant she hadn't expected me to win. She'd bet on the wrong horse, herself. I closed the email and flagged it, just in case. But I didn't reply. Let the past rot on its own. A week later, Harper knocked on my door again. "Hey, sorry to bother you," she said, stepping inside. But something strange happened. I was added to a Google Doc anonymously. No sender. But it had your name in it. She handed me her laptop. I scanned the screen. It was a long, chaotic document. Notes, screenshots, Slack excerpts. All formatted to look like a whistleblower report, only it was twisted. Taken out of context. It implied I had stolen initiatives from junior staff, manipulated Carla, and suppressed dissenting voices in the department. IT was fiction. Barely even coherent. But if someone wanted to believe it, they could spin a narrative. I scrolled to the bottom. The document ended with a note. Julia Harper isn't who she says she is. And this is only the beginning. I closed the laptop. Where did this come from? I asked Harper. No idea, she said. The link was anonymous. But I checked. It was opened through a VPN routed through San Diego. I froze. Vector Commerce West Coast office was based in San Diego. Of course, Renee had gone nuclear. She's trying to destroy your credibility, Harper said quietly. You know that, right? I nodded. Yes, but she doesn't realize what I've learned since last time. What do you want to do? I looked her in the eye. I want to show her what real leadership looks like. I didn't retaliate. I didn't confront Renee or escalate the document to HR. I gathered my team instead, my real team, and we met for an off-site planning retreat in Bainbridge Island. It was something I'd been meaning to do for months, but the timing had never felt right. Now it was perfect. We met in a cozy, converted farmhouse that doubled as a meeting space. No laptops. No projectors. Just whiteboards, notepads, and a fireplace that crackled gently in the background. I started the day by addressing the elephant in the room. Some of you may have heard rumors, I said. Or seen a strange document floating around. I won't pretend it doesn't exist. But I also won't waste your time explaining what we already know, that smear campaigns are real, and sometimes the cost of impact is envy. I looked at each of them. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to build, to innovate, to prove that strategy, kindness, and consistency can outperform theatrics any day of the week. There was silence. Then Harper stood and clapped. The rest followed. We spent the next 2 days mapping out the next year of growth. I watched my team ideate, collaborate, even disagree, but respectfully. There were no whispers, no side eyes. Just professionals working together towards something real. That was my revenge. Not just surviving, but thriving. 2 weeks later, I received another email. This time from a professional address. Subject: Vector Commerce Investigation. Interview request. I clicked it open, eyes widening. Vector's legal team had opened an internal investigation into alleged IP theft, hostile workplace behavior, and external defamation efforts. They were reaching out to past employees and known professional connections of Renee Calloway, and my name was at the top of their list. I sat still for a moment, reading the message twice. She wasn't just unraveling now. She was being dragged down by her own history. I forwarded the message to Carla. Subject: Full circle. Her reply came in minutes. Don't gloat. But do breathe. This is done. The final nail came when I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from a recruiter I'd spoken to years ago, before the promotion war. Hi, Julia. Just wanted to say I saw your keynote from the GE Summit. Brilliant work. Also, funny story, I interviewed someone recently who tried to pass off your strategies as her own. Didn't last long in the room. Attached was a screenshot of her notes. The candidate, Renee. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Her story had collapsed under the weight of its own manipulation and mine. It was just beginning. The storm had finally passed. Renee was out. Her attempt to discredit me had failed spectacularly. Her reputation, once carefully manicured, was now scorched earth in every meaningful circle that mattered. The whispers in the industry weren't just about her plagiarism or her professional misconduct. They were about the spectacular downfall of someone who tried to play chess and ended up flipping the board. But even in victory, I felt hollow, not regret, not guilt, just the subtle hum of exhaustion, because no one tells you what comes after you win. What happens when the battle ends and the dust settles, and you're left holding a sword in one hand and a crown in the other, unsure which weighs more? The first few days after the investigation closed were surreal. I walked through the office like a returning soldier. Colleagues smiled a little wider. HR suddenly sent glowing performance reviews I hadn't requested. My inbox filled with congratulations, invitations to speak at universities, interview requests from niche business podcasts I'd never even heard of. Harper brought me a latte one morning, a quiet gesture, no fanfare, and just said, "You were right to wait, to handle it quietly." But part of me still felt restless, not because I needed revenge. I'd gotten that, whether I wanted it or not. It was because of what I'd become to get here, because when someone tries to destroy you and fails, you don't just return to who you were. You evolve. Harden. Shape your decisions with a little more calculation, your kindness laced with discernment. You become the kind of leader who watches everything not out of paranoia, but necessity. I used to believe my work would speak for itself. Now I knew better. Now I was the woman who documented everything. I began noticing the power shift in little ways. For example, Carla started running big ideas by me before she brought them to the board. Not because she had to, but because she valued my input and knew I could spot gaps she might miss. Or how the CFO, once mildly dismissive of ops dev's numbers, began inviting me into quarterly financial forecasting meetings, just to make sure everything aligns. Or the unsolicited call I got from our biggest vendor, inviting me to keynote their leadership summit. "You've become a blueprint," the vendor rep said, and I realized she was right. What I'd built, how I'd built it, had become its own quiet legend. I wasn't just the woman who'd survived Sabotaged. I was the woman who'd redefined how to lead afterward. But not everyone was celebrating. Did I notice the shift in Carla first? She was still warm, still collaborative, but quieter, more reserved. She asked fewer questions, delegated less, started skipping the ops dev roundtables she used to love attending. I chalked it up to fatigue, burnout from months of growth and restructuring, until she called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon. "I'm leaving," she said bluntly. I stared at her. "Leaving?" She nodded. "The CEO offered me a role at our Singapore division. It's a major opportunity, but it means relocating permanently." I was stunned. "That's huge." "When?" 3 months. "We'll announce it next quarter." I nodded, trying to mask the sudden swirl of emotions. I was happy for her. Of course I was. Carla had been more than a mentor. She'd been my redemption. The leader who'd seen my worth when others buried it. She didn't just give me space, she defended it. But her departure meant something else too. A vacuum, a shift, and the sudden possibility that I might be next in line to fill it. She must have read it on my face. "The board has already discussed it," she said. "You're their first pick." I said nothing. "I know it's fast," she added. "But it's real, and it's yours if you want it." I finally found my voice. "What about internal politics? Anthony might be gone, but there are still Julia." She interrupted gently. "You are the politics now." The weeks that followed were a blur of transition plans, handoffs, and late-night strategy calls. Carla didn't make the announcement right away. She wanted it to be controlled, timed. But internally, people began to sense it, and for the first time since I joined Cartwright and Cole, people looked at me with reverence. Not because I demanded it, because I'd earned it. The board invited me to present a formal proposal on the future of global operations. I spent 2 weekends building a strategy deck that forecasted 5 years of scalable international growth, backed with live metrics, success stories from ops dev, and a personnel model designed to replicate our efficiency without sacrificing culture. When I presented it, the CEO nodded throughout. The board chair took notes. One of the oldest members actually clapped when I finished. That night, Carla called me. "I told you," she said. "It's yours." And I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that the next chapter was about to begin. But victory never comes without cost. I was sitting in my apartment a week later, flipping through old notebooks to prep for a regional sync, when I found one of the first pages I'd ever used at C&C. It was dated 3 years ago. Back when I was still new. Still hopeful. Still unaware that a bright-eyed assistant named Renee would one day try to cut the ground out from under me. The note on the page said, "Don't compete. Contribute. Don't chase power. Create value. That's where your voice will matter." I stared at it, hands still, because somewhere along the way, I'd become both. I'd contributed, yes, but I'd also competed. Quietly, carefully, but undeniably. I hadn't chased power, but I had earned it, and now I had to ask myself, what would I do with it? Would I protect the next Julia? Would I see the next Renee before she became a threat? Would I guard my future with wisdom? Not just strategy? I didn't know. Not yet, but I knew this. If leadership had taught me anything, it was that what you build matters more than who you beat. And I'd built something no one could take from me now. Not Renee. Not Anthony. Not even the ghosts of my own fear. The official announcement came on a Tuesday. Carla, composed and radiant as ever, stood at the head of the main conference room with the CEO beside her and read from a short, direct statement. "I've accepted a new position as regional director for our Singapore division," she said, smiling as if nothing about this moment was tearing her in two. "It's been a privilege leading operations here. But as with all good leadership, the goal is to build systems and people that can grow beyond you." Then she turned to me, and with that, "I'd like to introduce your new Vice President of Global Operations, Julia Harper." Applause erupted before I even stood. Some of it was expected, but some of it? Some came from people who'd once barely looked at me in hallways. Some from colleagues who had sat silent during the days when I was being sabotaged behind closed doors. And some, maybe most meaningfully, came from my team. The ones who had walked with me, built with me, rebuilt with me. I stood and spoke only 3 sentences. "Thank you for trusting me. I'm here because we did this together. And I promise, we're just getting started." That was it. The official baton had passed. Afterward, Carla and I sat in her office for the last time as coworkers. "You okay?" she asked, sipping her farewell latte. "Yeah," I said. "Are you?" She chuckled. "Ask me when I've unpacked on the other side of the world." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then she looked up at me, more serious now. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not because you're replacing me, but because you never became the worst version of yourself to get here. You had every excuse to, but you didn't." I swallowed hard. I wanted to. A few times. "Wanting to isn't the same as becoming," she replied. "And that difference? That's the kind of leader this place needs." We hugged, a real hug, not a corporate one, and I watched her leave with a strange mix of sadness and clarity. She was gone. The person who once pulled me out of a professional grave. But her legacy wasn't leaving with her. She had passed it on, and I would carry it forward. Becoming VP changed things, not just in name or office size, though I did get a nicer corner view. It changed how people moved around me. Some became more formal. Others tried to attach themselves to me like vines to a trellis. Everyone wanted proximity to power now that mine was official, but I didn't forget who had stood with me in the silence. Harper was promoted to senior strategist. 2 of my other team leads were offered department control under the expanded ops dev model, and me, I started rewriting the internal training program from scratch. Because I wasn't just interested in results anymore, I was interested in legacy. The first time I addressed the entire operations department as VP, I stood without slides, without graphs, just me, a room full of people, and the truth. "I wasn't supposed to be here," I said. Not according to some. Maybe not even according to the woman I used to be. I let that breathe, but I learned something through all of it, the sabotage, the struggle, the waiting. I learned that leadership isn't just about being the loudest voice or the boldest vision. It's about who you choose to become when no one's applauding. When someone tries to take from you. When you're standing in the wreckage of someone else's ambition. I saw a few heads nod, especially Harper's. I became someone I could trust. And now I want to lead in a way where you can trust yourselves. Because this department, this company, it only works when we stop trying to outshine each other and start trying to elevate each other. That day marked a new era. For all of USDT was 2 months later, during a leadership networking event, when I saw Renee again. She wasn't a speaker, she wasn't even listed as a panelist, she was a guest, invited by someone else. Drifting through the crowd like a woman trying to remember how to blend in, we locked eyes across the room. She hesitated, then walked over. Her hair was shorter now. Her blazer less polished. But the smile? Still rehearsed. "Vice President," she said, voice thin. "Congratulations." I nodded. "Thank you. I've seen the press releases. You're doing well." "I am." She shifted awkwardly. "I've been consulting. Small clients. Startups. Trying to rebuild." I said nothing. "You probably hate me," she said. "I don't." I replied honestly. Surprise flickered across her face. "I don't hate you," I repeated. "But I do pity you." She blinked. "Because you had potential," I said, voice calm. "But you mistook sabotage for strategy. You thought tearing someone else down would lift you up." Her jaw tightened. "And now," I said, stepping closer, "you're forgotten. Because the only legacy you built was one of destruction." She looked down. Unable to meet my gaze, I leaned in slightly. "I didn't destroy you, Renee. You did that to yourself. I just stopped playing along." Then I walked away. No mic dropped it. No applause, just clarity. Back at the office, I found Harper in the break room, humming softly as she poured coffee. "Did it feel as good as you hoped?" she asked. I smirked. "Which part?" "The whole journey. The comeback. The title." I thought for a moment. "It doesn't feel like a destination. It feels like a responsibility." She nodded slowly. "That's why you deserve it." We clinked coffee mugs, not in celebration, but in solidarity. A week later, I hosted our first interdepartmental leadership summit. Not a flashy one. Just internal. A few speakers, a few panels. But I made sure every voice got space. Every idea was honored. At the end, I stood again, as I had so many times now, and shared one last message. "Success isn't the finish line," I said. "It's the platform. What you do with it, how you carry others with you, that's what defines you." The room was silent. Then Harper stood and began to clap, and this time, everyone followed, because now they weren't clapping for a survivor, they were clapping for a leader.